So we now come on to the third and final principle, principle 3, which looks at effective fisheries management. And the MSC describes this in the following way. The fishery is subject to an effective management system that respects local, national and international laws and standards and incorporates institutional and operational frameworks that require the use of the resource to be responsible and sustainable. So the intent of Principle 3 is really to ensure that there is an institutional and operational framework which is appropriate to the scale and size and intensity of the unit of assessment, which delivers on Principle 1 and Principle 2, and that it's therefore capable of delivering sustainable fisheries. The way that Principle 3 is structured is divided into two components. The first of these relates to the governance and policy level. And if you like, this could be described as the high level stuff. This is the issues that apply at the national level or even the regional level. And the second component is the fishery specific. And as the name suggests, this focuses more on what are the specific objectives, processes that apply to the particular fishery which is the subject of this overall assessment. The way that this is structured, under governance and policy, we look first at the legal and customary framework. We then look at consultation roles and responsibilities. And finally, we look at long-term objectives. You might typically expect the scores for different fisheries which are managed under the same jurisdiction to be quite similar under these three performance indicators. In relation to fishery specific, we then get much more into what are the objectives, what are the decision-making processes, how is the compliance and enforcement, and finally, and this is appropriate because this is the final performance indicator of the MSC that we're looking at, is what is the monitoring and management performance evaluation. So in other words, the review. What is the process by which everything is reviewed? So let's look now at the first performance indicator, which is the legal and customary framework. Something that's very important for us to bear in mind here is that when scoring this, we should take account of all relevant tiers of management. So by this, I mean if the species is transboundary, so it crosses a national boundary, then there should be a requirement to look at the mechanisms by which management is shared. It could be that the vessels from one jurisdiction fish in another jurisdiction, in which case both the jurisdiction that applies to the vessel nationality and the jurisdiction which applies to the area in which the fishing takes place is also relevant. For highly migratory species, it might be that we're looking at the level of management at the Regional Fisheries Management Organisation, or RFMO. And in many cases, we will have to be looking at different ones of these levels of management at the same time to inform our scoring. So how do they fit together? Crucially, is jurisdiction being applied at an appropriate level to the stock? So is there a good relationship between the biological scale of the resource and the jurisdictional management of the resource? So this is just a reminder of something we already discussed in Principle 1, making sure that management is applied at the appropriate scale. Okay, so let's look at the first scoring issue of 3.1.1. And this is really looking at what is the legal foundation of the fisheries management. And importantly, is that legal framework capable of delivering MSC level fisheries? Now, as we look at this, the first two lines of this, which says there is an effective national legal system, is actually the same at the 60, the 80 and the 100. There is an effective national legal system in all three. Subsequently, we go on to look at the degree of cooperation. So what is the framework for cooperation with other parties? Now, typically, other parties would mean other international parties. So, for example, if the fishery involves different nations coming together within a framework, how does that take place? And at the 60 level, there should be a framework for cooperation with other parties where necessary to deliver outcomes consistent with Principle 1 and Principle 2. So this is something we see quite a lot in Principle 3. Principle 3 is talking about what are the frameworks which deliver Principle 1 and Principle 2. At the SG80 level, the cooperation here should be organised and effective. Again, it says where necessary. And at the SG100, the cooperation must now be binding, with binding procedures governing cooperation with other parties. At SG100, it also no longer says where necessary. Okay, so there is a requirement even in all circumstances. And the other small difference between the 60 and 80 and the 100 is that at 60 and 80 it says to deliver management consistent with MSC Principles 1 and 2. Same at SG80. SG100 it says which delivers. So there's that small change from to deliver to which delivers at SG100. So there's slightly more emphasis on what is the outcome. So what's the evidence of success? Scoring issue B relates to the resolution of disputes. And as we can see from these small examples, there is a long history of fishing disputes. You can see from these newspaper articles how often the word war is used or battle. So it's very much fighting terminology. So within the MSC, there is a requirement that there should be mechanisms in place to effectively resolve disputes. So let's start from the left-hand side here. SG60, the management system incorporates or is subject by law to a mechanism for the resolution of legal disputes arising within the system. So even at the SG60 level, there must be some form of mechanism. If there is no mechanism, it could trigger an automatic failure. At SG80, the management system incorporates or is subject by law to a transparent mechanism, which is considered to be effective in dealing with most issues that are appropriate to the context of the unit of assessment. Finally, at SG100, much the same, but the mechanism in this case should be tested and proven to be effective. Now, bear in mind what we're looking for here is to have that mechanism in place at all relevant tiers of management. So it could be, for example, for a highly migratory species, that we would need to be able to point to resolution mechanisms at the regional level, at the national level, and quite possibly even at the fleet level. The third and final scoring issue in relation to 3.1.1 relates to respect for rights. And the MSC's intention with this scoring issue is to ensure that established rights of any Indigenous or Aboriginal groups as well as any groups of individuals with customary rights that are dependent on artisanal or subsistence fishing, are fully recognised within the management system. So SG60, the management system, has a mechanism to generally respect the legal rights created explicitly or established by custom of people dependent on fishing for food or livelihoods in a manner consistent with the objectives of MSC Principles 1 and 2. As we move to SG80 and SG100, there's not much change in the language. We can tell that easily just by seeing that the overall number of words looks fairly similar. But what does change is we go from generally respect at the 60 level to observe at the 80 level and formally commit at the SG100 level.